I have the pleasure of being here with leader Stacey Abrams. How are you doing today?
I am well. Had a good day on the trail yesterday and happy to be out campaigning again.
I bet you do. I got to ask you the first question. Why do you want to run for governor of this great state?
I believe that we're put here to help people.
Hmm.
My parents raised me with three values: go to church, go to school, take care of each other. That's faith, service, family, and education. And for my purposes, we are a family here in Georgia, a family that has unfortunately not been given the care and attention it needs. There have been favored children and favored communities, and I think that we need a leader who's willing to invest in and serve all of us, especially in a time of pain, both physical and psychic pain. We need a leader who's willing to take the power that they hold and actually share it with the people that they lead. And for me, there is no greater calling than the calling of public service. And that means standing for offices when I believe I can do a good job. And in this case, when I think I can do a better job than the person who currently holds it.
Well, Leader Abrams, I got to ask you about your parents. You mentioned them here, and they're both ministers, by the way, pastors here. What have you learned from them directly? Like, what have they poured into you where you look back and you go, wow, I'm so thankful to have them as parents?
I am the product of two extraordinary people.
Hmm.
My parents are both United Methodist ministers. They were both elders in the Methodist Church. They're retired now. Growing up, it was that church was non-negotiable. But my parents told me, in fact, they told all of us, I'm the second of six kids. And I remember clearly the day my parents said they weren't taking us to heaven with them, that if we were going to get there, we had to get there ourselves. But what that meant was that they were responsible for shaping us and showing us, but they couldn't do it for us.
Right.
And when I think about the responsibility of a governor, you can't live someone's life for them. You can't guarantee them anything, but you can make certain that the pieces are there, that they can build their own destiny. Number two, my mom, when she got her pastorate, she had a charge with three small churches that didn't want to be one big church and didn't like each other very much. And we would say, well, Mom, they're not doing what you know what they need to do, and they won't do it. And she said, you meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. And you meet them at the point of their need. And what she meant there was that, yeah, we aren't always going to agree. People may be in different places, but your job is to find out where they are and go get them, not to bemoan why they're not where you want them to be. And then the last is from my dad. My father is, he actually ran the outreach ministry for my mom's church. He had his own pastorate, but when my mom took over this church, he understood how complicated it was to not only serve the soul, but to serve the bodies of these people, these community members who were desperate for help in southern Mississippi. And what he always said was, you do what you can, no matter what he said is having nothing is not an excuse for doing nothing. That you take what little resources you have and you pour them into other people, because what will come back to you is what God will have for you. But you aren't doing your job if you're not sharing what you've got. And so between the two of them, my ethos for how I move through public service comes directly from what they've taught me.
Leader Abrams, I got to ask this question. You came up short last time, 55,000 votes. What did you do the day afterward? Because you are so historical in nature, in my opinion anyway. What did you do the day after that you came so close to winning, but you fell a little short? What happened the day afterward?
So the day after the election, we were actually still in campaign mode in this way. We knew that there had been thousands of people denied the right to vote. We'd gotten more than 80,000 calls complaining about the process. And so there was no downtime. I woke up the next morning, we filed a lawsuit, we started sending out people. We sent out hundreds of people to go and help folks cure their ballots, make sure that their votes got counted. So that was the first day after. The second day after was the day after the 16th, when I did my non-concession speech. And that was the day that the election was truly over. Because people need to remember, the day after Election Day in 2018, the Associated Press, no one would call the election because of the irregularities. And there were a number of successful lawsuits that really made certain more people's votes got counted. But in the end, I didn't have the votes to become the governor. And so the day after that, I took a nap. I was sad. I was tired, and I was a little angry. So
I can imagine. I can imagine. Like, well, I'm going somewhere with this question because you took a nap, you got back up clearly, and said, "I'm ready to go." How did you know that you were ready to go to do the next thing that you felt like and you knew in your heart that you should do? Fair question.
absolutely. There are two ways to enter politics, and I'm not criticizing either way.
Hmm.
One is that there are the jobs that you want, and there's the ability to be in this public space doing good, and that is what calls so many people. For me, the issue is I want to do this work. What's the best platform to use? The work that I see that needs to be done, the work of social justice and economic justice, healthcare justice, criminal justice, civil justice, justice has different venues. And when the political opportunity isn't before me, then yes, because that platform is so broad and reaches so many. That's the platform that I want. That's the access, because the ability to help more people is what I look for. But when that platform isn't available, the work still needs to be done. And so for me, the galvanizing force is the work itself. And I've been privileged to be in the for-profit sector, the nonprofit sector, the public sector. I know where to go. If one place isn't doing what I need it to do, I believe in pulling pieces together. And so when I wasn't elected, I went to look for other ways to do it. And so I founded Fair Fight and Fair Count and the Southern Economic Advancement Project. And those were opportunities for me to continue to do the work I believed in, just without the job and the resources that come with being governor.
I got to ask you about those 85,000 phone calls. I was one of those people who was stuck in line for hours, in fact, and it was incredibly frustrating to actually see it. How do we know that this time around that won't happen again, Leader Abrams? Because there have been lots of folks who said to me, man, that was so frustrating, so depressing to stand in line for hours and feel like your vote does not count. How will we know it will count this time?
We're going to have to fight for it, just as we did in 2018, as we did in 2020, as we did in 2021. I mean, the reality is, until we have leaders who actually believe that our voices should count, they're not going to do the work necessary to make it easy for them to be heard. And one reason I think your story is important is that you stayed in line. But just think about the people who couldn't stay in line because they are on an all-call schedule, and if they had missed that call, they were going to lose their job. Think about the folks who have to take care of ailing, parents or children. They don't get 8 hours to stand in line. They've got a window of time when they can do this, and if they don't get it done, they can't. Those are people whose votes are suppressed. And there's this constant churning conversation about, well, who was really denied the right to vote? Well, you're denied the right to vote when your ability to cast your ballot is impeded because someone in charge didn't do their job. And so my responsibility on this side of the conversation is to set up those organizations that are going to help people know where to go, how to get there. And unfortunately, we now have new hurdles because of SB 202, a bill that makes it harder to vote by mail, makes it harder for counties to get the resources they need to make it easier for you to go and cast your ballot, makes it more complicated, and says that if you are standing in line, we cannot abide by God's command that we take care of one another because giving you food or water is now against the law. And so our responsibility is to try to make certain that we can't overturn it, but we can mitigate it, we can circumvent it, and we can tunnel under it if we need to.
Well, you've been very vocal about your faith. Why do you think Jesus was a progressive?
Well, because so we have come to create these narratives. But let's talk about what progress means. Progress means that you are doing better than you did before. I'm a progressive because I believe that we should aspire to the greatest possibilities and that we should always be measuring how much movement we have. Jesus was a progressive because he looked at the poor and said, not they will always be among us as a way to explain their existence. He did it as a call to action. He said, take care of them. He was a progressive because he believed there was an obligation of the state. In fact, we have to remember part of the reason he was crucified was because he challenged the state and said, you've got to do better. And so, yes, I believe Jesus was a progressive because I believe he wanted more for his people. He wanted progress. And he said that the state and the church had a role to play in making that so.
Is there still room for people of faith in politics, especially young adults who just may ask, what role can I play in the political arena today? What would you say to them?
Absolutely, you can be a person of faith. I bring my faith with me in every decision I make.
Mm,
But my most fundamental responsibility is that my faith is a shield to protect others. It is never a sword to strike people down. It should never be used to justify harm to other people. And often when we hear the conversation of, is there room for people of faith? It's a question of, can I use my faith to do better by people? I am a person of faith. I'm a Christian, but that means my responsibility is to protect the Muslim, the Jewish person, to protect the Sikh, to protect the Shinto, to protect the Buddhist,
mm.
to protect the non-believers, because my faith should be a shield that covers us all. And we need people of faith who are willing to use their faith for the protection of others. There's plenty of people who are willing to use our common shared label of faith as a justification for doing things that I find anathema to the Bible that I read and the God that I serve.
Gotcha.
And so I can't judge their conversation with God, but I can bring as many people who share my understanding
Mm.
of what the New Testament tells us and what the Old Testament showed us. And that to me is where we need young people, people who see in this day and age that climate action is not just about saving the planet, it's about preserving, protecting God's creation. And if that's your ethos, then yes, you should be with us.
Mm. When it comes to one main issue, abortion seems to be the dividing line for people of faith. How do you reconcile that with your own faith?
I am someone who understands the complexity of this issue. And so when I've been called upon to, denounce people who don't share my beliefs, I can't do that. As Democratic leader, my responsibility was to be the leader to people who shared my position on reproductive health or not. But here's what I believe. I believe that the conversation about a woman's ability to reproduce is a conversation with her faith, with her doctor, and with her family.
Mm.
I refuse to allow the state to have a voice in that, because the state does not have the capacity to answer conversations that profound. And
Mm.
so it is easy for me to reconcile it with my faith, because my faith says that this is a conversation with the Lord. I don't need to be an intercessor in your conversation. But I do know that the Lord wants what's best for each of his children. And if that means that you have to leverage the ability to terminate a pregnancy, then that is the conversation that you need to have with your doctor and your God. That is not a conversation you need to have with your state legislator.
Gotcha. Let's say you become governor, which I'm sure you're ready to hear those words. What are the first 2 or 3 things that you're going to do once you take office?
Number 1 is Medicaid expansion. And number 2 is Medicaid expansion. Number 3 will likely be Medicaid expansion. No.
No,
But
I
here's why.
understand. No, I'm laughing with you on this one because it's an important issue in our state.
It is. So let's go back to the question about reproductive health. Georgia not only has one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country, but we also have the number 1 maternal mortality rate in the nation for Black women. We are near the top for all women, meaning that if you choose to give birth, your likelihood of being able to give birth and survive is lower here than it is almost anywhere in the country and possibly anywhere in the world. Medicaid expansion starts to address that by making sure that you have the health supports that you need before you get pregnant. Because often one of the challenges in maternal mortality is the capacity of the woman to carry a child to term. We have done a better job of expanding Medicaid once you're pregnant, but we've got to do something before that happens. We've got to take care of the whole woman and the whole life. And Medicaid expansion does that. Number 2, it's making sure you have facilities to go to when you are pregnant or if you are sick. I was in Cuthbert, Georgia just yesterday with a woman whose aunt died because the hospital that used to be down the street shut down and the ambulance could not get to her in time to take her to a hospital in Alabama. Medicaid expansion would have paid for that hospital to be open, would have saved that woman's life. And then the last thing is Medicaid expansion is an economic development tool. We have heard about all these projects that are coming to Georgia, 300 jobs there, 5,000 jobs there. Medicaid expansion brings 60,000 jobs to Georgia, everywhere in Georgia, not in just the places that are used to getting some benefits, but every single region. That's money in the pockets of people. That's healthcare for everyone who needs it. And it's a way to say thank you for God's grace, because you start to see economic development in places that have been left out and left behind.
Next to last question. How do you see yourself as a historical figure? My daughter this morning, I was telling her I was going to be spending time with you, and she's read your book, by the way, your children's book, and she said, she is living history, Daddy. That's what she said to me. How do you see yourself in that?
I am honored by the compliment, but I think my responsibility is to not try to be history, but to try to make a good history, to make a good story for us, to tell the story of who we are. But I can't ignore the fact that as a Black woman, I would stand in shoes that no one's ever worn before. But that means I'm also standing in a space where young women like your daughter can see me and see what their possibility is, where young people who become cynical about change and about opportunity, they can believe that you can do it, that people who grow up in poverty, we have this, American notion of Horatio Alger, the sort of rags to riches, but we don't often see the story arc. I want people to see that you can come from a place, my parents were working poor at best, and that the growth opportunities, that the grace and the beneficence that we seek is possible. And if you can see that in me, if you can see that in my story, then I'm doing my parents and my grandparents and my great grandparents proud.
One of the questions I got to ask you, just to piggyback off of that, is you see yourself, from what I've read and researched, as running for president one day. What excites you about that? And I know you have this role here first, by the way,
Oh, yeah.
and running for governor, but what excites you about that?
Because the job of the president is to help people. The job of the governor is to help people. It's a question of how you help and the scale. The governor's job is to help the people of the state live better lives, to be the CEO of the state, but more importantly, to be someone who's in partnership with the people of the state. And so governor is the job I want because it's a very specific job. It's a job that lets you do good for the people here, but it sends a signal across the South and around the world about what we're capable of. The job of president is about helping even more people. It's about setting a global tone for who we are and who we want to be. My question when people, and I know that's not your intention, but there are those who become very judgmental, like, how dare you have that ambition? And my question is, why wouldn't you want young Black women to want to do as much good for as many people as possible? Why wouldn't you want women to have that as a spoken ambition? When we don't hear ourselves say what we think is possible, then others who have the whisper in their head silence that voice. Because if no one has said it before, you start to convince yourself that you're crazy for thinking it. I talk about it because I used to be one of those people. It was a dream I had, but I didn't say it out loud because it was surprising to me when Black women got to be mayors, let alone the aspiration of president. I don't want my nieces, who are at this point 15, 9, and 7, to ever doubt that there is not a job they want, not work they want to do, not service they want to deliver that they can't aspire to. That's why I talk about it, and that's why I want to do it.
I've always wanted to ask you this last question for a long time, Ms. Abrams. When the election did not work out like you wanted it to, you seemed, in my opinion, to get right back up and go, okay, I have another cause. How were you able to do that? Like, what in you drove you to say, okay, this didn't work out, but I feel like I'm called to do this? How did that happen?
I don't quit. And if running for office is the goal, then I lost. If service is the goal, then my job was to find another way to provide that service. I had to allow for the very human frailty of just being sad.
Right. I bet. Yeah, I can understand that one.
but the work was still there. The help that was needed was still out there. Helping people who didn't have Medicaid expansion So what could I do for them? People who were facing the challenges of casting a vote. How do I make sure that voting is made stronger? Making sure people got counted in the census, making sure that people who had vaccine hesitancy weren't treated as pariahs. We just realized that maybe you were a 68-year-old who didn't know what a QR code was because you live in a community where you don't have broadband and you've never had to use your phone that way. So for me, it's about solving problems. And yes, the role of governor is one of the most exceptional ways to solve the problems we face in the state. But not having that title or that job didn't mean the problems weren't still there. And it didn't mean my ambition to solve those problems disappeared. I took a few days off, but for me, the resilience is you don't quit. If you believe it's the thing you're supposed to do, you find a way to get it done.
Well, I got to tell you, as the father of a Black daughter, you make me proud just based on the example that you set in front of her. And that is not political at all. It is personal. And so I have to tell you, thank you. And if I don't tell you thank you, I'm going to be in trouble with my 9-year-old daughter today.
So do you mind telling me her name?
Zion is her name.
Well, Zion, I am so proud to know you even remotely. Thank you for reading my book. And I look forward to seeing who you become.
I appreciate that. And I will bring her on the campaign trail. She's already asked. And I said, that's no place for a child. She goes, I want to see her anyway. So
come on now. No. And here, my parents would take us with them to vote, to protest. That's how we got involved.
Wow.
Yeah, we look like make way for ducklings because there's 6 of us. We would like kind of stream out of the voting booth with them. But they wanted us to see them vote, but they also wanted us to see why they voted. So they would take us with them to do volunteer work, to do protesting, because that's how we connected the dots.
Well, I got to tell you, this has been an honor personally to be with you. And we do pray for you almost every day. And I mean that. I wish you well. And thank you for being a fine example, just historically.
Thank you so much.